So there is still so much confusion about why inflation persists and what happens next. And WBZ's John Keller is here with answers to some of the questions you've asked us through social media. So let's get right to the first one. Can Do That Too wants to know how much of the current inflation is ultimately being driven by high gas prices, and why are gas prices still so high while crude oil prices plummeted a month ago?
Yeah, great question, Ken. For drivers struggling to afford a full tank, obviously gas prices are a major source of inflationary pain. So it may surprise you to learn that the so-called core inflation measure, which key policymakers follow most closely, leaves out fuel and food costs because they're so volatile. Those prices are mostly based on global supply issues and demand, and it's really beyond the ken of these policymakers to manipulate that. As for the link between gas and crude oil prices, experts say as long as the demand stays as high as it's been, gas prices will stay elevated as well, Paula.
But someone called Complaints Pod asks, why aren't people pointing more fingers at the gas companies, food conglomerates, and other oligarchs for this mess?
Yeah, well, plenty of people are. In May, a poll found 72% of Americans cited greedy corporations as the #1 culprit behind high gas prices. But, Paula, a recent Associated Press fact check shows, quote, most economists say corporate price gouging is at most one of many causes of runaway inflation and not the primary one. They say bigger culprits are soaring spending by consumers and governments, supply problems, worker shortages, COVID shutdowns in China and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and slow reaction to all of it by policymakers, so plenty of blame to go around.
A complex stew. And finally, the question on everyone's mind, this is from Bessie Boy, what will it take to not just make it stop, but start decreasing it? Or, like a lot of other things, is this inflation just the new norm?
Yeah, make it stop.
Yeah.
That's the motto everybody is repeating these days. Look, history shows us that easing demand and the cooling off of both wage and price growth usually leads to a curbing of inflation. That's what the Fed is trying to do by boosting interest rates. It would also help if the war in Ukraine would end. And there's reason to think that this unique convergence of pandemic impacts, cramped supply chains, and an explosion of pent-up consumer demand fueled by flush bank accounts is a temporary phenomenon. But you have to note, even a tight-lipped guy like Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, who originally predicted much lower and briefer inflation, now says previous history doesn't necessarily inform what's going to happen next. I think we're in for a bumpy ride.
Wow, uncharted waters.
Yep.
John Keller, thanks. Lisa?